The following program contains adult language, poor taste in jokes, racial slurs, political slurs, slants, and all sorts of things that, if you are sensitive and have a delicate constitution, you should probably go watch Teletubbies. You were warned.
Hey kids, welcome back to Roto Talk.
To the build, chapter 2. So what we're gonna do, sorry for the delay, I was planning on doing one every day, and then the weather went to crap, and then we lost power the other night for like 6 hours because of snow. You may have seen my global warming video, which isn't too warming, but yeah, other than that, everything's fine. So grab your twisters, let's commence here. So what we're gonna do, start off with, we're gonna be mounting our engine rails. Okay. And so we're going to need both the engine rails. We are going to need our tube mount, stabilizer, support, whatever. Ooh, that dried a little crooked. That's okay. Those mounts, doublers that we did for the rod. Both the engine mounts. We're going to do the keel, bottom keel. No, only keel, I guess. Man, sorry, got a runny nose as usual. And then we're going to grab our upper and lower chines. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take some 80 grit on a sanding block. Now, whether you use a rubber sanding block, like this is what I like to use usually. And what's nice about these is they take the same discs. This woodroof key looking thing takes the same as my orbital sander, which I use my orbital constantly in builds. And it's a Velcro, and it just... great stuff. Or I use that staple gun that we use to staple our jig down, and I just put some 80 grit solid paper on. This is usually what I use for knocking off laser. So what we're going to do, we got these nubs here, okay, and the laser burn. We're going to hit this. Now, oops, sorry. Okay. Need some new sandpaper on there. It's pretty bad. Yeah, I'll just go with this. So this is 120. I usually use like an 80. It just depends. If you use 80, don't push as hard. If you're using a 200, push harder. But you just want to get these nubs off. It's easier to do it now. So it's nice and smooth. Get rid of those little laser nubs. Okay. Breakaways. That's how they're held into the frame. And we're just going to sand most of this laser off. Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be bare wood. You just want to get some porosity, some porous on there. I'm going to do this bottom. Try not to bevel it. We are going to bevel this a little bit. We're going to chamfer this later, but we'll do that after it's already in. Check your alignment. Now is a good time to fix that in case when you glue these together, you want that to be as fitting as possible. You only really need to sand the laser bits where it's going to be glued. So like this top edge, don't, yeah, I guess you should. So do the whole thing when in doubt, because we're going to be sealing it anyway. And I'm going to go ahead and sand all these up. We'll be right back. Like I said, I'm going to go over this again after it's glued in, but it's good to get the nubs and the big stuff off and to make sure everything's tweaked up. So if you're, like today is pretty cold, here's a little tip if you're in the Midwest or the North, and you don't have the luxury of building when it's 80 degrees out, take your epoxy and set it in some hot water. I do heat this workshop. It's not heated right now, but even with that, you know, if I come out here, fire up my 35,000 BTU propane heater, it heats up the shop in 20 minutes, but it doesn't heat up my epoxy in 20 minutes. So usually what I'll do, I'll just take a tub of hot water and let it sit in there. Don't get your epoxy too hot. If you get it too hot, like putting it in the microwave, believe it or not you can do, or boiling water, if you get it too hot, it actually cures much, much faster, and you don't necessarily want that either. So the first thing we're going to do, I did take epoxy, and I epoxied in all of my bulkheads into the jig. Don't have to spend a ton of time doing that. It's just, you just don't want this stuff falling out. Okay? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to put in our center keel. Splinters. Watch those. Ow. Okay. So let's move the camera over. And we're going to dry fit everything on this guy. Get this stuff out of the way. Okay. Now, if you'll notice, with this keel brace, I put 2 rubber bands, doubled them up, and put them in there. That's going to help support our keel. It says that in the manual. So we have to see, here's a slot, here's a slot, here's a slot. This slot is going to go in this back piece, as memory serves me correctly here. So we're going to wedge this in. Now, you don't want to force anything if you can help it. Try to work this in. Help it where you need to. Now you can see where your alignment's going to be relative to your bulkhead tops, okay? And you can see, like right here, got a ways to go, and nothing's lined up, of course. So you can, some of this happens from when you glue it together, if you got glue in the slots or whatever else. Let's see if we can get this out without, I got it jammed in there pretty good. Looks like this is where I'm hanging up. And this is important stuff to know. This is the stuff that gets you in the end. So what you can do, grab a piece of sandpaper. Let's try to, we're going to square all this up. We're going to make her slot a little bigger. Okay, might as well. Now, like I said, not necessarily that the laser didn't cut right. Laser was fine. It was probably my half-ass gluing job that I did the other night. Probably got some burrs in there. You could take a Dremel and do it that way. But this is a fairly fragile piece, and so are the chines, which we'll get to in a minute. You can see there's not a whole lot of wood holding them there. So you don't want to be too ape-armed with it. All right. So, sanded her out a little bit. Made sure everybody's nice. You hear that where it gets solid, that's a good thing. Same with this, fairly flush. It's not totally flush, but it's not supposed to be. Okay. Then what I do, see this gap right here? I put a clamp in here. Bring this until it squares up. It's not squared up yet. Then I take one of my 3D printed squares. Doesn't have to be a 3D printed square. But I make sure that that bulkhead there is nice and square. And then I CA tack it a little bit on both sides. Accelerator. Just, you don't have to use accelerator, by the way. I just do that because I don't like waiting. Even if I wasn't doing a video. So, let's see what this looks like. Pretty good. I like that. So, tack a little bit there. Now, the trick to the CA stuff, yeah, it's all well and good for tacking. And that's all we're using it for. There's zero strength in this stuff, my opinion. You don't want to build with CA glue. Ever, 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 ever. But, so, the other thing that I want to hit on is you don't want to put a ton in the joint. The reason being, just a tiny little dot. 2 reasons. One, if you screw up and you need to move something, which I think you've already seen me do, like over here, you're screwed. If you just want a little bit. You want to be able to bust it apart if you can. I'm going to put a clamp on that one too, I think. The other problem, the other reason why, and maybe the most important reason why, is if you put too much glue in the joint, you'll have nowhere for the epoxy to absorb into the wood, and you'll get a really poor grip, okay? You just want to use tiny little bits of CA, because think about it, if you cover, CA glue is almost like super glue, okay? It's almost like plastic. And if you cover all the joints with it, spray your accelerator and all that good stuff, great. But then when you go to put your epoxy on, your epoxy's not sinking into the wood, it's sitting on top of the CA. That doesn't make for a happy boat. So, can't stand not having a happy boat. Let's see. Okay, that's in there fairly nice. Now, we're going to move on to the engine bits and bobs. Okay. So, if you'll remember, now I noticed I had a screw up on mine. my screw up. See where that's not totally even? I don't know if you guys can see that. My clamp must have slipped a little bit. Now this is just a brace. It's not cosmetic. It's not going to affect anything. We're just going to sand those ears down. It happens. Okay? These are hand-built boats. These guys are like, oh, well, we have to throw it away because there's a millimeter difference. No, just sand it down. Epoxy will fill in the gap. It'll be fine. I'm going to sand those edges. I did neglect to do this one because this is going to get glued to the bottom of the boat eventually. Okay. So remember, we had a carb side. Okay. How does this go? We had a carb side, and we also had the exhaust side. This was the carb side. So the carb side's going to go on over here, right? Because when you flip your boat over, on the right is your carb. You're building it upside down, remember. Same thing with this dude here. This is our exhaust. They should fit nice and pretty. Okay. Oops, see? Goofed it up. Goofed it up. Takes a little bit of finesse. It depends on the kit. ZippKits stuff is really well thought out for a easy build, I think. Whereas you get into the Blazer and even ML, ML's pretty easy too. Blazer's a little bit more advanced, and I love Blazer Marine. I've built a few of his boats. Really like them. But it takes a little bit more puzzle work, I think. But anyway, so here's what we're going to do with these engine rails. So, again, think about this flipped over. We're also going to put our our shaft tube brace in now. And you set this as one piece and set it in there. But I found it's easier just to, and it usually doesn't break anything. There we go. Just like that. Okay. And then usually I have this cute little hammer. What the hell I did with it? Sorry. Ah. Still a little off. Remember when I sanded this? Don't want to force it. Okay, so I'm going to bring this down a little bit more. And might have a little bit of glue in here. So I'm going to take my Dremel. This is not a critical joint. This is just something that needs to be held together. Actually, we won't use a Dremel because people will be like, you're using a Dremel. You're going to destroy it. We're going to use a little mini file because there's a really good chance that I got schmutz in there from when we glued it. Remember, these were doubled up. Okay, so we're going to take this. Yeah, see, a little bit off too. Again, why is it off? Because I wasn't careful clamping it. But it's not, again, a critical thing. Now, another thing that we can do, because everything's still going to line up just fine. You can put a chamfer, just a quick one, because you got to remember, you're epoxying the crap out of this. This is a support structure. We'll make a little taper on it. So, I'm showing you how to build a boat like a normal person would build a boat. You're not going to build it absolutely perfect, and if you do, great. But most people, even if it's your 100th boat, you're not going to build it perfect. You're always going to have some little thing, and part of learning is learning how to fix those little things that you done screwed up. Okay, and this is not a bad screw up. I wish all my screw ups were that good. So that fits better now. Now, we can do, to make our life a little bit easier, we're going to square this up and glue it right now. So I'm going to put my CA on it first. A little bit of dab there. I'm going to square this up. Looks pretty good. Now, the nice thing is, if it does go out of square, perfect. It's very easy to fix because you just have like this tiny little dot, and that's nice and easy. So we're going to do the same thing with this. You want it to be relatively in position here. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see that. Again, we're not building a space shuttle here. It's a Crackerbox. If this was a hydro, not that it's not an important boat. Crackerboxes are some of my favorite boats in the world. But when it comes to hydrodynamics of a cracker versus a hydroplane, a lot of difference there, man. You like hydroplane, you want to build on granite or super, super perfectly straight everything, because one little dip and it all goes south of cheese. So we put that super glue in there at CA just to give us a little stiction. That's stick and friction. And then we're going to go ahead and put this in. There we go. Okay. I'm going to press it. I'm going to twist it. Okay. And I'm going to go down the line. Put a little tack here, a little tack here. Smear it with the needle maybe. Again, don't go crazy. You want your epoxy to seat in. Now, everybody, and I'm sure I'll probably say this in every single chapter of this video build, everybody builds different. Everybody has their tips and tricks. Some of them work great, some of them are bad. There's going to be people that say, oh, you shouldn't do it that way, you should do it that way. Do it the way that works for you. I've built a lot of boats. I've only had one or two that really sucked. I will admit it. I built a couple that were like, ugh, I think we're not doing a video on that. Okay, I don't like that. Hopefully you can see this. This one's a little bit out of square, so I'm going to hold it right there. You want it to be square. Not the end of the world if it's not, to be honest, with this boat, because by the time you put your chines on and your skins on and all those things, it'll straighten out. And in the camera angle, one, I'm using a GoPro, and those have a fisheye. It might not look square in the picture, but I mean, we are using a square. It should be fine. This one looks like it might be too, not too bad. Just get it in there. I'm going to show you something here in a minute. Need to buy some more of this stuff, but not this stuff. This stuff sucks. Don't buy this. I think I used this in my chemicals video. I mean, it does work okay, and it's cheap, but there's a reason it's cheap. Okay. See that? You don't want any gap. That kind of helps you understand that you're square, if you will. Plus, using a square helps. And I think Joe, I'm not sure if in this particular kit, I can't remember, but a lot of times he'll put a laser cut wooden square in there that you can use for trimming things up. Now, if you look at the stern here, what we'll have to do is we're going to square this up, do the exact same thing. You guys get the idea. I will be right back. Stern is all squared up. One of the things I do, and I'm not necessarily going in order of the manual, but this is our throw rod. Remember? Our shaft over here. Handle. One of the things that I do with this, because it's a really tight fit, it's laser cut, it's a good fit, but it's very tight, and I usually install it at this point because it's easier to get everything in and get everything the way you want it. If you wait till later, you got all this chines in the way and crap like that. So a lot of times what I will do is I just set it in at this point until I get the chines in. But what I do is I take it on a drill and I put it in the drill and chuck it in like a lathe almost. Then I just take a piece of sandpaper in my hand and I spin it, and I give the ends a nice little taper. I don't know if you can see that or not. And then I just slide this in at this point. You don't have to do it this way, but just after the chines are in and you got everything really getting squared up, you might not feel like messing with it. Okay, and then these little capper dudes, which are supports, are going to go on either the ends or the inside. I honestly don't remember. Don't think it really matters. I put them on the outsides so you can't see them. So now at this point, you could put on the chines, which are the outer rails. You got the upper and lower chines. You can do it that way. Or you can, I recommend you go ahead and epoxy everything in the way it is right now. Because everything's nice and square, I hope. Let's see, square, square. But it's only tacked, that doesn't matter. It's only tacked in square. So if you really give it a knock, like I just did, or something breaks, but everything looks really good. Check the bottoms, make sure your bottoms are square, but again, take that with a grain of salt. I'm more worried about square that, X and Y, not the Z necessarily. All right, so at this point is where I will epoxy these in and let everything sit. In the magic of video editing, this will not take us long at all. So one of the things I do, I'm going to put these building material links in the video. And this time, I promise I won't forget, because I always forget. I use these little graduated cups. Very seldomly do I measure, unless I'm doing a lot of epoxy, like I'm putting on a deck or a skin or something like that. Then I do. But I've done so many builds and used so much epoxy in my life that I pretty much just know you're mixing 1-to-1. With the case of what I use. West Systems may be different. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But in this case, I am going to measure this out, and I'm just going to do probably, I don't know. We'll do 3. 1.5, 1.5. But I'm going to thin it, okay? And I'm going to use 5-minute epoxy. I'm not going to use 30. I use 30 primarily only for skins and things like that. And the thing I said, like in the first video, I used denatured alcohol. I squirt a little bit in here, and then I thin it out. That way it absorbs into these joints. I'm going to reinforce anyway. But this is just for building structure, okay? Once there's certain parts of a boat that I will reinforce certain joints after I build it. Just because I have literally driven crackers till they've fallen apart, like an entire summer. And I'm talking wave bashing out on my mom's big lake that I was raised on, and just beating the living tar out of them. And I know what goes and I know what doesn't. And so I do, in this case, I do just a nice thin seaming, so everything's nice and tight and glued up. And then once we cut the boat loose from the jig, we flip her over, and then there are some reinforcements that I do. You don't necessarily have to do. A lot of you guys are going to be driving your boats on nice clean ponds. You won't ever have to do it. I never know what I'm going to run into. I might be running over geese, which is what I try to do, or on my mom's lake, beating the heck out of them, or on my lake, which is usually fairly mild. So to give you an idea, we got our heat-treated epoxy in the water. We will wipe it down because I don't want any contamination. Again, this is the Bob Smith Industries. We're going to mix it half and half. Okay? And you're going to need popsicle sticks. So I buy these cups. I buy popsicle sticks by the multi-thousands off Amazon. It's very cheap. And epoxy brushes, which are actually resin brushes. I'll put a link to those. I go through these like water too. So we're going to mix up 3 of this. 3 ounces. I'll try to do it right instead of my half-assed way. So we're going to do 1.5 of one and 1.5 of the other. Hang on, be right back. Now, it does not have to be perfect, okay? If you've got a little bit more resin than activator, accelerant, whatever, it'll take longer to cure. If you got more of one or the other, it'll be faster to cure. So what I'll do now, I'll mix up a little bit with the popsicle stick. And then, again, you don't have to thin this stuff out. This is just what I do. 1, it makes for less of a mess. You don't have globs of crap coming down. And 2, it kind of stretches your epoxy a little bit. And when you're using this fast cure stuff, if you thin it, this is denatured alcohol. If you thin it, it really helps it get into those joints. And it gets a little kind of curdled, like a bloody brain. You ever have one of them drinks? Them's good shit, man. It'll make you puke fast. Anyway, little bit of alcohol. First time I ever said that in my life. Little bit. Okay, we're gonna get nice. It's not like totally thin, but, and I'm just gonna start in the middle so you guys can see it easier on the camera. And then I'll just turn it off and move on. Don't be afraid to glue. I mean, yes, epoxy is weight. If you're racing, sure, watch your ass. This is, I don't know. I'd rather have stability with a cracker. Crackers can only go so fast. I'm telling you guys, I am the cracker king. I am Mr. Ritz. In the sense of, not that I'm great at building them, but I've built a lot of crackers. I've run a lot of crackers, and I've destroyed a few. And I'm telling you right now, you can only get them up to a certain speed, and they will blow over. I don't care how dialed in you've got it, you ain't getting a cracker doing 100 miles an hour. At least, if you do, I really would love and enjoy seeing it. So, in the case of a hydroplane, where you're like, you can really kind of roll your oyster on speed, yeah, you know, really watch your weight and stuff, but shit, I can make it about any cracker do 56, 57 miles an hour. I don't care how much epoxy's in it. Okay? Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and do the rest. All we're doing, you'll feel the epoxy warming up. Hotter it gets, less time you have. And I epoxy the ends, because you're going to have to seal this whole boat anyway. And the nice thing about thinning it is you also don't get a ton of buildup and a ton of weight either. Because it's thin, you're using less. And I mixed way too much. It's going to be a waste. And I'm not going to glue in that dowel yet, because I want to get the chines on first, because if you glue that dowel in and it's not squared up, you ain't getting them chines in too easy. And make sure you get all the way down the keel. I call it the keel, center rub. Okay. Epoxy's heating up. Make sure you don't miss any joints. It's actually really easy to do that. It's like, oh, I got them all. Shit, no, I didn't. And I kind of give a little bit of an extra attention to this tube here. Try not to get any on the top surfaces. If you do, just wipe it off with your finger or whatever. Not the end of the world if you do, but whatever. And I think we're good. Seeing drips. Now this stuff's getting hot. You can see how it's clouding already. And in about another minute, it's going to get snotty. It's really hot. But that's okay. That's what I want. I want to get this thing framed up and built. And also, if you don't see how it's getting that, look at that. Whew, it's going to get gross in a minute. I'm going to let it sit. Another thing too, oops, made a mess. Another thing too you want to do is, if you do find that you didn't mix enough epoxy and you've run out, don't go over already laid epoxy that's not cured with new epoxy. See, look at that. Aha! Goes fast, doesn't it? Alright. We're going to let this cure up. So now what we're going to do, we're going to move on to the chines. Okay? Our epoxy is not totally cured, but it's darn close. So, you have upper chines. The chine is the outside that the skins rest on. Okay? So you've got your upper chine, which is going to go here. Okay? And then you've got your lower chine, which is going to go, remember, you're building the boat upside down, lower, bottom, which is kind of weird when you're building it upside down, because you'd think the upper is upper, but it's not, because you're building the boat upside down. And that one's going to ride right here, and it's going to go into that notch right there. Okay? Now, what I do, don't know if it's necessarily right, I haven't read the manual in a very long time, but with hydroplanes, you always build bilaterally. Okay, so it's like you build your frame on the left, frame on the right. You skin the left, you skin the right. You don't just build the entire right side and then build the entire left side. That would be bad, because you're going to end up either warped or twisted or not level or whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on the lower chines first. I'm sorry, upper chines first. And the reason being, both sides. Okay, get this crap out of my way. The reason I'm going to do it that way is because nothing else is in my way. If I put the lower chines on first, which are the ones that are going to go on the top here, okay, then I have to kind of work around them. I don't want to have to do that. I want to try to, you know, make my life as easy as possible. Well, if that was true. Anyway, so the upper chine. So usually what I'll do is I'll start from the back, and hopefully you guys can see this. I don't know if you can, but there's notches. I'll show you once it's all together. And we're going to dry fit it first. Make sure they go all the way in. I don't worry about the stern at this point. I worry about the middle. Getting everybody in. Let's go to the back. Okay. There we go. And you can see the nose is notched right there. See that? Okay. So how I do this is I start at either bulkhead 3 or bulkhead 4, usually 3, because it's kind of the center, right? And I'll push it all the way in, and you want to make sure, see that? You want to push from the bottom, squeeze it like this. And I'm going to put a little dab of CA on there. Everybody's best friend. Use your fingers. Ah, see? Popped out. And this activator sucks, so we're going to go a little slower. And now it's your choice if you want to go to 2 or 4. I'm going to go to 4 in this case. Do the exact same thing. We're tacking. Done. Then we're going to tack the rest. Go back over here. Careful, because you only got, if you did it right, you've only got a little dab. Make sure you're all the way in and all the way flush. Okay, make sure nothing's stopping you. Use your fingers. You can feel, you can see through your fingers. I promise. Because if you put your fingertip under there, I'll show you here in a second. See where my finger's at? Okay. Now, you see that mark? You can feel that with your finger if it's flush. There it is. We're going to do number 1 now. Again, careful. Now, you can take a square. Make sure all these are square if you want to. I've usually never had a problem. I honestly don't think I've ever squared those up, and my builds usually come out pretty good. Okay. Don't force the nose. Okay. If it's a little bit forward or back, we're going to square it up. But again, we don't have any structure on here yet. It's square. You probably can't see this, but okay. And the last piece we're going to do is the tail end. Right. Should have got better CA activator before I did this video. I'm going to sped it up quite a bit. Okay. Down here. I'm going to do the same thing, the back end. Now, if you feel that it's not level, meaning it's not flush, take it apart now. Figure out why. Much better to figure out why now than when you get it all epoxied and like, oh, bad times. Okay? That is good. See? Nice and tight. Alright. So, what we're going to do now, I'm going to do the other side off camera because you get the gist. And then we're going to epoxy these chines in and the rod in. And then move on to the lowers. That's done. It's starting to look like a boat now. So now what we're going to do, we're going to take these handle reinforcements and we're going to tack these on. Now, you notice one's rounded. Well, I guess they're both rounded, but one's rounded more than the other one. The rounded more than the other one faces the rear. So all I'm going to do, take a little bit of CA, use my fingers to line that up. By now you're used to doing this. And just spray the edge. It'll get in there. This is just holding it together for when we epoxy it. Okay? And if you want to, you can just put it on here. And you can, if you want, spray it first. This activator is so crappy, you actually have time to position it. Okay. Flat sides go up, or I should say down. Deck side. Okay. There. Rod is in. Nice. And now you can see I can still rotate it. It's not glued in. But the ends are on. It's not going to fall out. If you want to put a drop on there, you can. So now the lower chines is the exact same principle. Just rinse and repeat. Okay? So what I do, I line it up. I usually start. Now, here's the problem. How do you CA it? Because you got to remember, your bottom skins are going on. How I do this, I pull it back a little bit. like that. So there's a gap. And I slide, put a little bit of CA in there. That's it. Done. Okay. And then I do the exact same thing with the rest of them, because you only need to pull it out like a millimeter. Squirt a tiny little bit. Again, making sure it's flush. That one's not. See? Make sure it's flush. My bad. So. Easily fixed. I wasn't pushing down hard enough when I did it. So before you epoxy this thing, make sure you got everything square, make sure everything's flush, and you'll be just fine. Okay, that one's done. Can't lift it, it's good. Same thing over here. This time I'll actually put some pressure. Okay, rinse and repeat, baby. It's the exact same principle. I do the end last, work my way towards the bow now, and then you've got that twisted notch. It's going to twist a little bit. So we might clamp that before we epoxy. We'll see how it goes. So I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to do the other side, and then we'll come back. We'll epoxy it, and that'll probably be it for today. We'll let her cook.
And we're back.
Right back. So one last thing before we epoxy in. The deck supports. I tend to put in at this stage. I think you're supposed to put them in later, but that's just how I do it. You can also see that I clamped this to give it a little bit of help with the nose while it's CAing. This is, and I'll leave the clamp on there during the epoxy process too. And for this epoxy process, I'm going to epoxy all these joints. I'm going to use 30 weight, or what I call 30 weight, but 30-minute epoxy, because this is the last thing I'm doing today. Might as well. I don't care. And plus, I want my chines to be nice and strong. Everything's nice and level and square and tightened up. Let me give you guys a little bit of advice. The first Thunderboat I ever built, the SLR, ZippKits SLR Einstein. Okay, I built that thing in the winter in Ohio. I lived in Ohio. And I have my shop heated, and that was fine. But I used 30-minute epoxy, which is actually 3-hour epoxy, to put the deck skins on. Okay? And the problem with that was I turned off my heater. And if your shop is below 50 degrees, don't do skins with epoxy. Keep your heater on, because the next morning I was all excited. I took all my clamps and my weights off, and the skin popped back up. I had to do the whole thing over again, and I had to sand everything. I was so mad. It was my own fault, though. A couple things happen when it's cold out. Now, it's not that cold in here. It's 50 right now, ish. So I'm not too worried about this stuff. It'll be okay. Epoxy gets, pretty hot, but when it was cold. I mean, my workshop probably went down to 30 degrees before everything was hardened up. Oh, let me tell you what, son. That was a bad day that next morning. Wasn't a Dunkin' Donut in the world gonna make me happy after that. I was pissed, because those skins, those sponson skins, are not the easiest devils to put on. And I woke up thinking, sweet, I'm gonna be totally done with this boat today. No, start over. I was not happy. My own fault, though. So, if you're going to epoxy, when it's really cold out, do one of two things. Keep your heater on for at least 3 hours, or at least keep that area. Put some heat lamps above it. Just at least keep it up to 50, 60 degrees. Or bring it in the house for that bit. Okay. So, these are the deck rails. There goes the door. These I'm putting in right now. They only go in one way. You cannot screw it up. There is no right. There is no left. At least, yeah. Double check. These are just to support the deck, and they are notched. So what I do with these, make sure the notches are in. Okay. I hold it all the way up with this finger, these fingers, octopus fingers, and then shoot a tack. And yes, this is easier to do after you cut it off, but I don't like, and I know this comes from my career and what I do for a living, I'm kind of an assembly line, I'm a robotics engineer, so I look at efficiency. I don't like to mix epoxy 65 frickin' times. So it's like, okay, what can I put in for this run? Almost out of this crap, thank God. I'm going to order some more epoxy because I'm running out. I am never out of epoxy, so I need to order some of that. I'm going to order the good stuff, so next video we have, it won't be quite as tedious. So I make sure these are all up all the way. You got to remember, even if this stuff, you want everything square. Hang on. Sorry about that. So anyway, we got these deck supports in, and that's pretty much about it. I'm going to come back out. It's dinner time, and I think I'm done. It is getting cold out here. I'm going to go ahead and epoxy all of these. Make sure you epoxy your nose, your bow in there. Use your brushes, get everything. So you want to make sure you get on the bottom tops. Don't do up here. You're just going to have to sand it off. You don't want to do that. We already did all the joints. So you're going to go under here, and usually what I will do with that is I'll take a brush. Don't bend it right here because the bristles come out. Bend it just above there. And I do that. Okay? If you want to thin the epoxy, go for it. If you don't, that's fine too. I just prefer to thin it a little bit on the 30, not much. But we're going to epoxy the rail, the supports. We're going to go inside, bottom side of the lower chine, bottom side of the upper chine. That's it. All the way around. So, until next time, kids. Keep dry side up. Bye.